Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood in the burning bomb bay, the crippled aircraft shaking violently around him. Below him, his waist gunner, Sergeant Bobby Castellano, lay bleeding, unable to move, his own parachute shredded. Of the 10 men on board, 9 had already jumped, leaving just 2 men and a single working parachute. The B-24 Liberator, named Liberty Belle, was 18,000 feet above France. A severe wound inflicted by German flak during a bombing mission. At 24 years old, Webb, a quiet Texas farm kid, had already completed 11 such missions. His training dictated a pilot's duty was to save the aircraft, or to be the last to save himself. But Castellano, barely 19 and having lied about his age to enlist, was gravely injured. Shrapnel had shattered his leg, and with heavy blood loss, he could not stand, let alone pull a ripcord. He needed help as Webb looked at the young gunner from Brooklyn. He didn't just see a crewman he'd known for 4 months. He saw a son, a brother, a boy who wrote his mother every week. A boy whose optimism reminded Webb of his own younger brother. In a span of 3 seconds, Webb made his choice. He unstrapped his own parachute and secured it onto Castellano, quickly explaining the vital steps for survival. Count to 3, then pull. He pushed him out into the vast open air at 17,000 feet. Then Webb turned back to face the inferno of his dying aircraft, searching for any improbable chance of saving himself. Marcus Webb had been raised on a cattle ranch in Amarillo, Texas. Early in life, he learned the fundamental rules of responsibility. Care for the herd, the land, and those who depended on you. He joined the Army Air Force in 1942, drawn by the urgent need for pilots. He quickly qualified to fly the B-24 Liberator, a heavy bomber. By May 1944, he was flying combat missions from bases in England, targeting industrial centers across France and Germany. Robert Castellano joined Webb's crew in March 1944. A lively kid from Brooklyn, Castellano was known for constant chatter about his mother's cooking, 3 younger sisters, and his neighborhood. He carried photos of his family, always ready to share a laugh. Webb was reserved, Castellano was outgoing, an unlikely pair. Yet a connection formed, mirroring Webb's brother back home. By July, they had flown 11 missions together, enduring severe flak and fighter attacks over cities like Cologne, Stuttgart, and Munich. Their crew remained a tight unit, each man relying on the next. The 12th mission on July 8, 1944, targeted a synthetic oil plant near Lyon, France. Webb's B-24, the Liberty Belle, carried its 10 crew members and 5,000 pounds of bombs. They had taken off at 9:30 a.m. from their English base. The flight progressed without incident until their target run. At 2:00 p.m. they began their bombing approach. German 80 anti-aircraft guns unleashed a heavy barrage. Shells burst around them, shaking the aircraft violently. Webb held the bomber steady as his bombardier called corrections. At 2:17 p.m., a flak shell struck the Liberty Belle's No. 2 engine. It exploded, sending shrapnel tearing through the fuselage. Webb quickly feathered the damaged engine, knowing they could still fly on 3. But moments later, the No. 3 engine caught fire. The flames spread with alarming speed. At 2:19 p.m., Webb issued the bailout order. The crew had practiced this, each man knew his position and procedure. Exiting through the bomb bay, counting to 10, then pulling the ripcord. The navigator went first, then the bombardier, followed by the flight engineer. Webb watched the crew members disappear through the bomb bay, all out within 90 seconds. Webb then began his final check, moving through the aircraft to ensure everyone was gone. It was then that he found Castellano, the waist gunner, lay near his position, hit by flak. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his left thigh, shattering his femur. Castellano was conscious but in shock, bleeding significantly, unable to reach his own parachute. Webb glanced at the clock. 2:22 p.m. The aircraft was descending rapidly. The No. 3 engine fire had reached the wing, and structural integrity was severely compromised. He estimated perhaps 2 minutes before the bomber would break apart. Webb tried to retrieve Castellano's parachute from its storage rack, but the same flak had also shredded his pack. Its canopy was unusable. Webb checked his own parachute, still strapped to his back. It was intact, the one remaining working chute. He faced an impossible choice of bail out alone, save himself, and no one would fault him. The aircraft was doomed, Castellano unable to move. But Webb thought of Castellano's mother in Brooklyn, of weekly letters, and the half-pay sent home to his sisters, the worn photos. At 2:23 p.m., Webb unstrapped his parachute and attached it to Castellano. The gunner was confused, protesting that Webb needed it more. Webb ignored him, securing the harness, checking the ripcord, ensuring Castellano could reach it despite his shattered leg. He calmly repeated the procedure: jump, count to 3, pull the ripcord. The canopy would deploy, then steer away from the burning aircraft, aiming for a field while avoiding trees. Castellano was crying, pleading with Webb, suggesting they jump together. But Webb insisted there was no time. Castellano had to go now. At 2:24 p.m., Webb pushed Castellano out of the bomb bay door. He watched him fall, watched him count, watched the white canopy blossom open at 16,800 feet. Then Webb turned back to the rapidly destabilizing bomber. He had perhaps 60 seconds before it disintegrated. No parachute, no conventional way out, but perhaps something else. Webb ran forward to the cockpit, searching for emergency equipment. He found a seat cushion, a flotation device designed for water landings. It was not a parachute, but still something. He grabbed it and raced back to the bomb bay. The aircraft shuddered violently, the wing failing, fire engulfing everything. The altitude was 15,000 feet, still far too high to jump without a parachute. Then an idea sparked, a desperate, improbable thought. He'd once read a story about a Russian pilot in the First World War. He jumped from a burning plane, surviving by landing in deep snow. Webb looked down at the French countryside. It was July, there was no snow, but there were trees, a dense forest. Could trees work like snow, their branches breaking his fall, slowing his descent? It was a grave risk with a survival probability as low as 5%. But 5% was infinitely better than 0, better than plummeting to the ground with the wreckage. At 2:25 p.m., at an altitude of 12,000 feet, Webb jumped. He clutched the seat cushion against his chest, unsure if it would help. But it was something to hold on to. He fell at terminal velocity, an astonishing 120 miles per hour. The wind screaming past as France rushed up to meet him. He could see the forest below, using his arms and legs. He steered his body, aiming for its densest part. At 4,000 feet, individual trees became visible, large oaks or ashes. They had thick branches and dense canopies. At 1,000 feet, he tucked his arms and legs, protecting his head. He tried to make himself as small as possible. He hit the tree canopy at approximately 90 miles per hour. The initial branches offered little resistance, snapping like twigs, but they stole some momentum. He tumbled through, hitting larger branches, each one breaking but further reducing his speed. At 30 feet from the ground, he struck a thick branch. It didn't break, instead, his body whipped around it. His back took the full force of the impact, ribs cracking. The force was tremendous, but he stopped, caught, dangling 30 feet above the forest floor. He hung there for perhaps 10 seconds, gasping for breath, his back screaming in protest, but he was alive. Somehow he was alive. He let go, fell the last 30 feet. He landed hard and then lost consciousness. 3 hours later, he awoke to find French resistance fighters standing over him. They had witnessed the parachutes, seen the bomber crash 5 miles away. They found Webb in the forest, severely injured but alive. The resistance brought him to a safe house where a doctor treated his injuries. 3 broken ribs, severe bruising, and spinal compression. Yet, there was no permanent damage. He would recover. Webb's immediate concern was Castellano, and the resistance confirmed they had also found him. The parachute had worked. Castellano had landed in a field 2 miles away, but was captured immediately by a German patrol and taken prisoner. Webb spent 2 months with the resistance, making his way back to Allied lines. This happened in September, following the Normandy breakout. He returned to England for recovery, but his injuries meant he would never fly combat again. In November 1944, he went home to Texas, where he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation acknowledged his extraordinary actions during an aircraft emergency. However, it did not mention the parachute. Castellano survived the war as a prisoner of war. German doctors had saved his leg. He was liberated in April 1945. He returned to Brooklyn, receiving a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. The two men did not see each other again until March 1946. Webb received a letter from Brooklyn from Castellano. He had painstakingly tracked Webb's address through Army records. The letter contained just 4 words: "We need to talk." Webb traveled from Texas to New York, meeting Castellano at a diner in Brooklyn. This occurred on March 18, 1946. They sat across from each other, neither speaking for 5 minutes, simply looking. Finally, Castellano broke the silence, articulating a thought he carried. "You gave me your parachute. You jumped without one. You should be dead." Webb responded that he had been lucky, citing the trees and the resistance. But Castellano dismissed luck, saying Webb had made a conscious choice. He elected to save Castellano's life over his own. That kind of decision, Castellano insisted, meant everything. That day, Castellano made a promise he owed Webb his life. He would never forget, and they were brothers, not merely friends. Brothers, he said, took care of each other. Webb maintained that Castellano owed him nothing, but Castellano profoundly disagreed, saying he owed him everything. That day, March 18, 1946, was Castellano's 21st birthday. Webb was 26, and Castellano declared they would celebrate their birthdays together. Every year, no matter what. Webb initially thought he was joking, but Castellano was serious. On March 18, 1947, Castellano appeared unannounced at Webb's ranch in Texas. He had driven 500 miles with a birthday cake. They spent the day reminiscing about the war and planning their futures. On July 18, 1947, the anniversary of the jump, Webb arrived at Castellano's apartment in Brooklyn, bearing Texas barbecue. They ate and talked into the early hours of the morning. This became their enduring pattern every March 18th and July 18th for 60 then 62 years. They would fly, drive, or meet halfway, prioritizing these reunions above all else. In 1952, Webb married Sarah from Dallas, with Castellano serving as his best man. In 1955, Castellano married Maria from Brooklyn, and Webb was his best man. Their families gradually became one extended unit. Webb's children affectionately called Castellano Uncle Bobby, and Castellano's children called Webb Uncle Marcus. They shared holidays, took vacations together, bridging 500 miles as if next-door neighbors. In 1978, when Castellano's eldest daughter married, Webb walked her down the aisle. Castellano's leg injury from 1944 had worsened, preventing him from walking. In 1983, Webb suffered a severe heart attack and underwent triple bypass surgery. Castellano left Brooklyn and his business to stay with him in the hospital. He did not return home until Webb was stable. In 1994, both men were 74, commemorating the 50th anniversary of their jump. They traveled to France, finding the forest where Webb had landed, and the field where Castellano had touched down. They stood there, remembering. In 2001, Castellano's wife died from cancer. Webb flew to Brooklyn the same day and stayed for 3 months, providing unwavering support. In 2004, Webb's wife died from heart failure. Castellano traveled to Texas and stayed for 3 months, offering the same comfort. By 2006, both men were in their 80s, their health in decline, but the tradition held. The last time they were together was July 18, 2006, the 6th anniversary of the jump. They met in Dallas, a halfway point. Both relied on walkers. They sat in a diner not unlike the one where they reunited in 1946, talking about their lives, their families, and 62 years of shared brotherhood. Castellano died 3 months later in October 2006 from pneumonia at the age of 81. Webb followed him 2 months after in December 2006 from heart failure at 86. At both funerals, their children read the same eulogy, recounting the story of July 18, 1944, 1 parachute, 2 men. A decision made in 3 seconds forged a bond lasting 62 years. In 2015, Marcus Webb's grandson, James, meticulously researched the story. interviewing family and military records to confirm every detail, ensuring this remarkable account would not be forgotten. The original parachute no longer exists. Castellano used it once and left it behind in France. But the decision, the profound choice, and the enduring brotherhood it created, that lasted. Sometimes, the most significant moments in life unfold in just a few seconds, when one person looks at another and makes a choice, not born of calculation, but of deep human connection. Webb chose Castellano's life, and Castellano dedicated 62 years to honoring that choice, ensuring Webb understood he had saved not just a life, but a brother. This is the story of one parachute, two men, and a brotherhood that spanned their entire lives.